Losing your coach in college football almost guarantees you're going to lose a lot of players to the portal, especially when that coach goes to a bigger college. But somehow, Iowa State is managing to keep a ton of guys on roster.
You are Locked On Cyclones, your daily podcast on the Iowa State Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, now the #1 sports podcast network. I'm your host, Nick Marovets. Thank you for making this your first watch or listen of the day. I appreciate it more than you know. Be sure to hit subscribe down below so we can prove once and for all that it is, in fact, a Cyclone state. As today, we are first breaking down why I think Iowa State has a really good chance of keeping a ton of guys on the roster from last season. And I think that will propel Iowa State into a ton of success. We're going to go over players. We're going to go over new coaches. This first segment's going to be packed. Then the second segment, and actually the third segment, we're basically just only talking money. We're going to start with Jamie Pollard's comments, dive a little bit more into that because it is so confusing. But then we're going to compare that to Utah in the third segment. Utah has just changed college football forever. And we're going to break down what they did. Should Iowa State follow suit? Can't wait to get into all that and more. But first, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. So to start today's episode, we have to start with Iowa State keeping players around. Obviously, Iowa State lost Matt Campbell last weekend on Friday. Old news at this point. Now we have to worry about how does Iowa State keep players on the squad, because this team from this whole last season, we won't get to see them again in the bowl game, which I'm curious what you think. Let me know in the comments below. But this last team from this last season was extremely talented. Remember when we compared Iowa State to Iowa? We went position group by position group. Iowa State won a lot of those. I think it was only two position groups that Iowa won, if I remember correctly. This Iowa State team was loaded. Of course, Jimmie Rogers is going to want to keep guys around. And I do think Iowa State is doing a very good job up until this point. However, I will say, I don't believe the portal is open. The portal should open today. I know I said earlier this week, I think that report was wrong. I think it was like 5 days after or a couple days after, but Matt Campbell wasn't officially, the head coach, he hadn't officially left until Monday because of the board and whatever. So I was wrong on the date. Technically, the portal isn't open at the time of this recording. It's not open yet for Iowa State players, but it will open soon. And we've heard players say, hey, I am intending to enter the portal. My intent is no longer to be at Iowa State. And the reason I'm bringing this up is we just haven't had a lot of Iowa State players do that. We have not had a ton of Iowa State players say, yeah, I'm not interested in coming back. I have off the top of my head Quentin Taylor Jr., Karen Brookins, Zay Robinson, not very many. Not very many. A few from earlier. Josh Patterson was on there, but that was before this whole thing. So I feel like Iowa State's doing a very good job right now of the guys in the locker room. Now, the 2026 class is a little bit different. We've already lost Will Slagle. Now, he just said he wasn't committed to Iowa State anymore. He said he's still exploring options. However, remember, Clanton and Campbell are both at Penn State now, probably the two main coaches that he was coming to Iowa State for. So while Iowa State is still on his list per his release, I'm assuming he's going to go out east because of both Clanton and Campbell, right? Both of those coaches leaving at the same time. But Bryson Williams, safety, also announced that he is decommitting or suspending his commitment or whatever from Iowa State. The reason I think Iowa State is doing so well with the guys in the building is, for one, Matt Campbell built this team to really be very, very, very tight, okay? And this is kind of my weakest point, so I'm going to say it quick and get it out of the way. I think these guys love playing with each other. Now, there were always going to be guys who jumped in the portal this season no matter what happened, right? Whether Matt Campbell stayed, whether Iowa State won a Big 12 championship, there were always going to be guys who jump in the portal. That's the nature of college football today. But I do think that Jimmie Rogers comes in and he introduces himself and he kind of shows what the program's about, and the guys realize, because Jimmie Rogers did say in his press conference, like, to the players, you didn't come here for just one guy. You came here for what the community is about. You came here for what Iowa State football is, just kind of as a huge entity, not necessarily for one person. So I'm going to get to know all of you. And I would love to keep you guys around. I think a lot of the players potentially realize, I love playing with this team. I love playing with these guys at this place in Ames, Iowa. This is a great place to be. We haven't seen a whole lot of those intentions to leave yet. For that reason, I do think. The other reason is all the coaches coming in. I do think the swiftness of Iowa State has helped guys kind of realize where the vision is already, where it's headed towards, with obviously Jimmie Rogers as the head coach, but we've talked about the DCs coming in, and I'm going to talk about it right now. Tyler Roll is reportedly going to be the OC for Iowa State next season. Remember, he was at Iowa State in 2024 as the RB coach, running backs, and then went to Detroit for coach for the Lions as the tight end coach. I just am speculating here. I feel like that's really good for Iowa State, retaining the unbelievable tight ends they have and the running back room that is so good. Obviously, has already coached Sama and Hansen, right? Like that already to me feels like a win. It just because those two running backs I feel like are a wonderful 1-2 punch for Iowa State. And I think that this fits really, really well. Obviously, he's coached them before, and based on what his offenses looked like in the past, they're very run heavy, and I think this is a perfect mesh with Rogers. I think the whole system flows together very, very well, and I think we have a really good chance at retaining those running backs and those tight ends. Now, I could be wrong, but just based on right now what I'm seeing, I feel really, really good about that. So you've got these guys probably love to play. I know they love to play with each other, right? They're definitely at least considering their options. The swiftness in which Iowa State is moving with these head coaching, assistant coaches, position group coaches, hires is helping the kids or the athletes to understand what the vision of Iowa State is moving forward. They're not left in limbo. They're not left looking in the rearview mirror. They can actually sit down in the driver's seat, look at the road ahead of them and say, yeah, I want to go on that. That's a highway. I would rather drive on a highway than some random dirt road I've never been down, just to keep the driving analogy alive. I do think that this is being handled in a very positive manner. I think Iowa State's doing a good job from that aspect. Now, when it comes to Jimmie Rogers and whether or not, he's going to keep these guys or not, one of the things he talked about was his intention is to meet with every single player, get to know them, and then they're going to have this meeting with the coaches and all of the parents, and they're going to tell the parents what the vision is. And I do think this is just me looking in from the outside. Like, I am as far disconnected as I could possibly be. This is just me as a human seeing what is going on. I imagine the players greatly appreciate the fact that Jimmie Rogers is extremely transparent. And I think that's something we're going to come to really be a fan of as well. Jimmie Rogers literally just tells you how it is. And I think he's not going to tell anyone in that room, in that, meeting room when that first meeting came around. He wasn't going to say like what needs to be said or just what they want to hear. He was going to tell them what's going to happen. Like, this is what the program's going to be. This is what we're going to be about. This is how we're going to do it. And I think the players, I'm sure, were like, some of you aren't going to like to hear this, but the people who want to hear it, they're going to want to stick around. And Jimmie Rogers taking the time to get to know every single one of these players, I think is going to help build that relationship before the portal opened up. I don't know if the timing ended up just being really positive for Iowa State and giving Rogers enough time to get to know these guys and really develop at least some sort of relationship, even if it's not even necessarily a positive one. At least it's a relationship. And he's recruited a lot of these guys already. I'm sure they just wanted to play at a higher level. Like, there's a lot working in Iowa State's favor here. So when it comes to how is Iowa State handling the coaching transition as far as, 2026 recruiting class, guys in the room, so far, with the portal not being yet open at the time of this recording, I am giving them an A grade. Now, this could go downhill very fast. I could get clipped. This could be, a hot take or a cold take or whatever it is. I do think, though, right now we're looking at a potential for Iowa State to bring back a lot of talent. And I will say this. I don't put a ton of credit into social media posts because sometimes I'm really, I'm not the best at reading social cues. I'm going to be completely honest. So social media posts are like really kind of tricky for me. But based on what I've seen, I feel really good about where Iowa State is at. The posts that are being made, what's being said, even from guys that are graduating. It all feels like it's good. It feels good. Okay. And that's just a guess. That's just like a gut feeling, if you will. You could totally have a different opinion. If you do, let me know in the comments below. What do you think of what Jimmie Rogers has done so far? Where do you predict this team will be next season? I'd love to hear it. Add Nick_Marv on Twitter as well. But as of right now, I feel really positive. I do. I like where this team is at from this last season. And I think Jimmie Rogers does as well. He wants to retain a lot of that talent. And I think he's doing a good job so far, at least of letting them know, like, this is what we're going to be about. And I think a lot of, there's a lot of similarities between Matt Campbell and Jimmie Rogers as far as, kind of pillars of how they run their program. And a lot of those players are realizing, like, okay, it's not going to be that different. Like, we're going to see a lot of success here. This is still the best city on the entire planet. I know everyone on the Iowa State football team thinks that Ames is the best city ever, because how could you not? But I have a very good feeling about where Iowa State is at. Jamie Pollard has said a few things in the past that make Iowa State look like it's going down the drain. And he had a few comments about NIL and Rev Share and that whole thing that we're going to break down after, the Jimmie Rogers kind of press conference, his first press conference. We're breaking that down, though, coming up right here after this. But first, a word from our friends over at FanDuel. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play, and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. A receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. FanDuel lets you jump into the moment. Player props update as guys heat up. Live spreads and money lines adjust instantly. As Iowa State gets way out in front of their opponents on the court, the live spread starts to change. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. One last thing I really want to touch on before we get to Jamie Pollard here at Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, now the #1 sports podcast network. I haven't yet had a chance to talk about this. It's been so chaotic. Jimmie Rogers is being introduced at the Iowa State-Iowa basketball game on Thursday, okay? If you thought that Hilton was already going to be on edge after what happened this last weekend, the fact that Iowa State basketball is potentially at the pinnacle of all time, and the fact that this is the Cyhawk game, you were somehow wrong. It's going to be even more intense. So we're just throwing this in because we were talking about Jimmie Rogers. It was on top of my mind. I didn't want to go into Thursday without having mentioned this once. Look out, Hawkeyes. That environment, that atmosphere in Hilton, it's going to be scary. Killian Torrey, Taman Lipsy talked about it. I don't even know if those vets on that team are going to understand. They have a concept of how crazy Hilton is going to be. All right. So if any Iowa State fans are watching this, pack the Hilton. It's not pack the Jack, but Hilton Magic got to be in full effect. I have no doubt that the Cyclones are going to win that game, but with Jimmie Rogers there, we got to welcome him in loving warm arms, whatever you want to call it. This is the time. I mean, I cannot believe that environment is going to be crazy. I think I need to find a way to get up there. That being said, let's talk Jamie Pollard, because this has been certainly a topic of conversation over the last few days. Definitely been something that it's turned heads. There's been a lot of people saying this, a lot of people saying that, a lot of rumors, hypotheticals. It's been a crazy situation. And after the Rogers' first press conference ever, Jamie Pollard went off to the side and had like his own little smaller press conference where I've talked about this a little bit, where he kind of basically said everything that's happened, everything that people are saying online is completely false, and it's only hurting Iowa State University. It's only making it harder for Iowa State to succeed. Now, whether or not what Jamie Pollard is saying is true, as far as those, comments made online or whatever, that's not even the point of this segment, okay? You can agree, you can disagree, whatever it is. We're really diving into what Pollard said about the NIL Rev Share situation that Iowa State is in, because that was the point of all the comments online, that Jamie Pollard was over controlling in those situations. But we never really dove into what that looks like for Iowa State. And we have taken a few segments, few shows in the past. The one that comes to mind was the flight funds with the Hawkeyes, with Iowa. I don't know how Iowa is doing that whole thing. I was like, I think Iowa State needs to do something similar. And I think they actually might end up doing something similar to that. And we'll talk about the Utah thing in a minute. But as it stands right now, we do know a few things about how Iowa State runs with their NIL Rev Share whole thing. We know the numbers that Iowa State is giving to each organization or each team, as far as like football, basketball, wrestling, women's basketball. It was $13 million to football, $5 million to basketball, $1 million to wrestling, $750,000 to women's basketball was, I believe, the numbers. And so those numbers are coming out of the $20.5 million cap that Iowa State is allowed to pay their players. Remember, this was put into effect last summer. There is a cap of $20.5 million, or 20% of each university's athletically generated revenue that they're allowed to spend on their players. And how they divvy it up is based on each university. And that's why we talked about the Big East, right? With their lack of prevalent football programs, like Creighton is going to just dump a bunch of money into their basketball program because, like, where else are they going to put it, right? And that might give the Big East an advantage. Well, for Iowa State, they put 13-5, 1 and 750 into their football, basketball, wrestling, women's basketball, respectively. What's different? What's changed over the last few years? Because remember, with the collective and the We Will and all of that, it's different now. The way I understand this is that Rev Share and NIL are entirely different. Okay, that's the first thing we have to get very straight, very clear. And they both still exist, right? I thought one was just going away. I thought the collectives were kind of disappearing. NIL still exists. Rev Share still exists. It's just that before there was a donor, and that donor would pay the collective, and then that collective would pay the athletes, essentially. Now there's no more donors, to my understanding, and that's what Jamie Pollard was really talking about during his interview, was like, this is changing because we're not having individual donors anymore. It has to be a business, right? And businesses are paying the athletes directly. There is no middleman with the collective. The business and the athlete come into an agreement, and that agreement is kind of passed through the NIL Go situation where they're monitoring and making sure that everything is valid. Then there's also the school paying the athlete. So let's say, for example, Jamie Pollard gives Iowa State football $13 million. And then Jimmie Rogers says, all right, Rocco, we're going to give you $1 million of this $13 million. We're going to divvy up the rest of it across the rest of the team, whatever. Rocco, you get $1 million. That $1 million is from the school. Now, Rocco Becht can go out and say, oh, hello, different business that is entirely unrelated to Iowa State University. How would you like a football player to be the face of this product you have? The business then can go, we would love that. Let's shake hands. Boom. They shake hands. They come to an agreement, and that business pays that athlete. What Jamie Pollard was talking about in his presser was saying, for one, donors can't just like say they're a business and pay players anymore. That doesn't work. It has to be an official business because it's going through this whole process. For two, what he said was, I don't have control. This is Jamie Pollard speaking. I don't have control over Hy-Vee, or to be politically correct, Fairway. He's being a jokester out there. He can't make any business spend money on an athlete, right? And that's troublesome for Iowa State, because when players are at, visiting Ohio State or Colorado or what was the other? Yeah, no, those were the two. Ohio State and Colorado were the ones that were brought up as far as schools being in debt right now. Not necessarily in this press conference, in other sources I've seen. Those schools are saying, all right, we're going to pay you this much, and then we're going to promise this much in NIL. That's kind of what's happening. There's this much rev share, and then there's also a promise for this much NIL. And what Jamie Pollard is saying is, we're not going to promise that, because that puts us in debt unnecessarily. We can't promise that kind of money. We're just going to basically tell them what they're going to get paid for rev share. And if they find an NIL deal, then that's great. But that puts Iowa State at a disadvantage, because they're not offering that. Like they aren't telling players, yeah, we're going to get you this much money with this NIL, deal. We Will, I think, is going to change a whole lot, because it's not going to be the donor into the collective, into the players. I think We Will probably end up being some sort of a resource, to connect players to NIL opportunities. I wonder if We Will end up being like the flight funds that Iowa does, where donors can put money in there, and then that money goes into the athletic program. And I'm not sure how they're able to do it. I do not know, but basically, like, donors are putting money into the program, and then that money can be put into the rev share. So the money isn't directly going to a player, but it's complicated. I don't know if that's what we will ends up becoming or not. I have no idea. With Brent Bloom leaving too, it's very messy. But that's the way I understand this. So Jamie Pollard is basically saying that while everyone has the $20.5 million cap, other universities have different markets as far as businesses in the area and likelihood they're willing to pay players. So those other schools can essentially offer NIL deals. Whether or not that's right in the recruiting process is a totally different issue. And Iowa State is choosing not to do that because they just don't want to end up in debt, which I think is probably fair. So Iowa State's at a disadvantage from that aspect already. And then when you look at the actual NIL deals, it sounds like Iowa State's at a disadvantage in that market as well. That's the way that Jamie Pollard laid it out. That's how he was talking about it. So Rev Share and NIL still both around, very different. I think people assume they're the same because I certainly thought that they were the same. I thought they were interchangeable terms. They're not. NIL is basically a business signing a contract with a player. They're completely, it's like the player isn't even on the team. Obviously, the player's on the team, and that's why the business wants them to sign this contract, but it's like unrelated to the university, unrelated to the program. The Rev Share is the school paying the player directly for being on that team. So they're both instances where the player's getting paid, but they're from different sources and they're completely unrelated. And that's what Jamie Pollard was talking about in his presser after the Jimmie Rogers first presser. It was like a day full of pressers for Iowa State. That being said, I can see where Jamie Pollard is coming from. He's got concerns. Iowa State's in trouble in some sense. Utah has done something that legitimately changes college football forever, and we're going to talk about that coming up right here after this. But first, a word from our friends over at Rouge Ready. Let's talk about something most men don't bring up, but absolutely should. Stress from work, money, life, it doesn't just switch off at night. And when it shows up at the worst possible time, Rouge Ready is designed to help you take back control. Rouge Ready is a next-generation prescription treatment created to support both the brain and the body so you can feel present, confident, and ready when the moment matters. Rouge Ready combines 3 clinically proven ingredients in 1 mint that dissolves under your tongue so it absorbs fast. The science behind Rouge Ready stands out with 3 clinically proven ingredients in 1 formula designed for both mental and physical readiness. It's easy to understand why over 150,000 men have already made the switch. If you've been thinking about making the next step, now is the time. Head to rougiet.com/lockedoncollege. That's RUGIET.com/lockedoncollege to get 15% off your order for a limited time. Rouge Ready. Feel present, feel confident, feel ready. There is always some sort of headline going on in the Big 12. That's what makes it the best conference. And we're talking about here at Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now the #1 sports podcast network, the best podcast network. And Iowa State, I think, might need to follow in the steps of Utah, who just changed college football forever. Whether for good or for bad, college football will forever be different because Utah just brought private equity into the landscape of college football. And I don't know how I feel about it yet. I will say this, like I just said, I think Iowa State might need to follow in Utah's footsteps. I'm not saying Iowa State needs to sign private equity. I'm saying Iowa State needs to figure something out as far as NIL goes. They have not been nearly creative enough considering the position they're in. I think we can all agree it's a disadvantage right now. They're not probably the strongest NIL or Rev Share or anything like that. It's all we talked about is money problems, and Jamie Pollard keeps talking about it. They need to get more creative. So is this the answer? Well, I'd love to hear what you guys say in the comments below, but let me first lay out what is going on here. Basically, Utah, I'm going to try to explain this in a way that even makes sense to me. Utah made this company, okay? And the company is called something like, or it is Utah Brands Entertainment, LLC. So they created this company that is a for-profit entity that handles everything athletics. So ticketing, concessions, merchandise, sponsorships, everything that normal, basically athletic departments would handle. This athletic entity, this Utah Brands and Entertainment, LLC, handles it. That's their job. So they kind of separated it's like somehow they separated themselves from themselves by creating a new business. And then that business was sold in part to a private equity firm called Otro Capital. Okay, so we don't know the specifics of this deal, but Yahoo and Ross Dellinger reported that if it were signed right now, it would bring in $500 million in athletic revenue for Utah. Okay. The interesting wrinkle here is that not all of the $500 million would come from the private equity firm. Some of it's going to come from donors as well. And that $500 million is essentially just athletically generated revenue that can be put into the Rev Share, that can be put into renovations, that can be put into, flying the team, equipment, all of that kind of stuff that we talk about when it comes to athletic generated revenue. So that in of itself is really the basics of it. Utah retained majority ownership of this company that runs all of the athletic operations. So they still have the ability to decide everything that Utah does, but a portion of that company that decides what Utah does is now owned by, some of Wall Street, some of New York City or whatever, and then a portion of the donors. What does this mean? Well, this basically makes Utah semi-pro sports. This basically makes Utah like the G League or, AAA baseball, because now it's got a bunch of owners and a private equity firm involved, and that firm's job is literally just to make money. So those people that own that, you can kind of think of them in a way, this is not a direct comparison, but in a way, you can think of them like the Packers owners, right? All of these owners come together and they put all this money into the team, and it's not the same. But then the owners want to see success from the team because then they get a portion of that success and they make money, right? It's not the same as the Packers thing. I'm just giving you an example because I feel like I know a lot of people who are Packers owners. And it's like the only publicly traded NFL team, right? So Utah essentially said, we're no longer really a college. We're just going to get a ton of money from this private equity firm, and you're going to own a portion of it. They kind of sold some of their soul, to be honest, is kind of how I look at this. It's unfortunate. But I think that they needed the money, or this was a great way to get out ahead of being in debt. Like I mentioned, Colorado and Ohio State both in debt. I think it's Colorado's projected to be around $27 million. Ohio State, I think, is in almost $38 million from last season, those athletic departments. And Utah said we weren't going to do that. So they did this instead. And I'm not going to tell you whether or not Utah is right in this. I'm going to say for Iowa State's sake, I don't think this is probably the play from maybe like a moral standpoint, just as of right now. But right now doesn't really matter in 5 years, right? And I do think that there is a world where Iowa State probably benefits from this. At what cost is really the good question. I do think Utah benefits from this. At what cost is the question. I don't have the answer for that right now. I don't know what the terms are. I don't know what really any of this looks like. I just know that Utah said, hey, here's a portion of our athletics, and it makes a bunch of money. We'll give you money over time if you give us a bunch of money, which is wild. Wild that they were just like, yeah, we're not even going to hide the fact that this is basically it's not college sports anymore. So do I want Iowa State to do this? From like the love of college ball standpoint, from, being an Iowa State fan standpoint, I would say probably not from like a purist standpoint, but from an understanding how much trouble Iowa State is in financially, from understanding that, yes, Jamie Pollard said that the Board of Regents is probably going in the right direction, but we don't know what that future looks like for certain. If Iowa State wants to compete in the Big 12, if Iowa State wants to stay in a Power 4 conference, they might have to make a move like this. Now, does it have to be this egregious and this crazy? No. I honestly, I don't know if I love this from Utah. This feels like the beginning of the end of college sports in a way. I can't believe that this is really happening. But I do think Iowa State has to do something. Is it the flight fund, whatever, the flight squad, whatever they call it over at the University of Iowa? Maybe it is something like that where the community can donate and give it to the program or to the athletic department as a whole. And then the department decides whether or not that money goes into the Rev Share or to the flight funds, or not the, whatever this is. Well, actually, it is the flight funds. That's what Iowa's is called. But I mean more of like the private jets or the buses gas or, the equipment or whatever. Like, Iowa State decides it doesn't go straight to the players. There's something like that in their future. Do they go the private equity route? I hope not, but it's something they could do. We've seen, obviously the We Will Collective was selling pizzas and selling beverages and all sorts of things for ways to raise money. Iowa State's in a challenging spot. I think that's very clear. They need to find a way to make a bunch of money, though. I hope they don't go the Utah route, and I just don't know why. It just feels like wrong to me. It's not semi-pro sports. It's college. But we are certainly getting closer and closer every day. I think we've officially reached that semi-pro category with this move by Utah. It's only a matter of time before a bunch of other college teams do this as well. And then what's the regulation on that look like? I don't know. Iowa State might have to do it to get ahead of the curve. There's a whole bunch of moving parts here. The bottom line is, the reason I brought this all up, Utah is making moves to stay relevant in this current landscape. Iowa State needs to do the same. All right. Is it this? I don't know. Yes, no, maybe so. All right. Potentially, who knows? But they need to do something. And they need to do something fast based on the timeline that Jamie Pollard keeps throwing out. I really hope they do, because I don't want Iowa State to just fall off into oblivion. And I don't think you do either. So drop in the comments below what you think of Utah. What would you do? What do you think of the Iowa State recruiting class? What do you think of what Jamie Pollard said as far as NIL, all of that? I'm curious what you guys think as Iowa State fans right now. Let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys for listening to this point. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. Leave 5 stars if you're listening. I appreciate every one of you guys listening on a podcast. That's really cool. Until next time, Cyclone fans, sayonara.